Hey, everybody, this is Mark Thompson, and this is the Chief Executive Summit. I have the privilege of working with CXO, CEO, and board members, talking in a very deep way about how it is you become ready for this role at every stage in the game that you play. And so you've joined me in episodes in the past, traveling the world, talking to the CEOs who really have been able to have the highest impact, the longest tenure, and frankly, have done that through great preparation. Well, there's really nobody better to talk to about that than Geoff, because Geoff has been a part of the revolution and really thinking through what it takes to bring the whole person, the whole executive, the whole journey that that individual executive has brought to the work, and understand what it really means to assess that, evaluate that, and coach that person to greatness. There are many times in the work that I do, I have the privilege of being able to look at the work that Geoff's done and his team and learn so much about how I can help that person take it all the way into the corner office or decide that next chapter in their life, because he has a very unique approach to this, which isn't kind of bogged down in some of the self-absorbed rubric of other types of social science, or even working with many of the recruiting firms who also would like to place an executive in the role, whereas Geoff and his team are very much motivated to making sure that we have the right fit, the right alignment, and really help people become the best version of themselves. So thank you, Geoff, for being here.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Mark. Thank you.
Tell me about this process that you take that really differentiates it from the other experiences that a new CEO or an aspiring CEO might take. Because face it, if you are an aspiring CEO or an existing CEO, you will be assessed nowadays. This is a part of the standard operating procedure. And so getting a sense of how you take a look at this versus the other guys would be, I think, a great place to start.
Well, I'll be brief and we can dive into more details if you're interested. Let's talk about what our process isn't in order to make it clear what it is. What it isn't is a battery of psychological tests. That's one approach for trying to figure out what makes someone tick. We find that psychology tests or cognitive tests are not incrementally that useful at the CXO level, doesn't give you a whole lot of new information beyond what we can get using the methods we'll talk about in a moment. And so it's not, looking at Rorschach tests or, that kind of thing. Another thing it's not is hypothetical questioning. So 100 years of research in my little field of industrial and organizational psychology reveals that when you ask CEO candidates or CEOs how they would do something, it doesn't necessarily predict how they will do something. So this is not a simulation. It's not make-believe. It's not where we're giving people brain teasers to solve and see how they solve them. So that's another method that this is not. So what is it? What are we talking about here? So what this is a very in-depth approach to understanding what someone has done across their entire life and career, and looking at those experiences through the lens of a very particular executive situation, a strategy, a situation that they're being considered or have recently joined. So it's basically like if you're fortunate enough to come through our process, it means you're on the short list of leader candidates for some of the best known and respected companies in the world. And we'll spend 4 or 5 hours talking through your career journey, from early career influences in your life to what you accomplished and failed at, and how you worked with different kinds of people throughout your career journey. We'll then verify and validate some of those things you tell us by talking to 10 or so of your either current board members, peers, subordinates, past bosses, etc., to really gather deep data on others' perspectives on you. And then we sit with you and tell you the truth, where we walk through, hey, here are the themes that have popped up. Here's why it's relevant for this situation or not relevant. And then, maybe hand them off to you, Mark, for your magic to work with them on a longer term basis. But it's a very practical but thorough, almost forensic level of data collection on your leadership behaviors and performance over your career and life, considered against or viewed through the lens of what's needed to be successful in a current role.
When you think about that last framing, I'm I'm just delighted and inspired because since I do take the long game version of this journey, often prompted by the insights that and the gifts that you brought to this conversation, the alignment with it being role specific, that it's for the situational leadership context that an organization is facing now, an industry is facing. How do you think about evaluating that dimension of the lens through which you're looking at this person's life?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think doing it wrong looks like just giving people generic feedback, right?
Right.
Here's some generic feedback. And that's easy to get. You could, have an off the shelf survey, get feedback, and then all of a sudden, okay, so what do I do with that? The high end version, which you're absolutely steeped in, is looking at, for a given business to be successful, what are the value creators? What are the strategic initiatives? What is the situation today with the culture, with the products, with the, what stage of organization are we talking about? Who are the personalities involved? And to be more specific than not, with our scarce time and energy as leaders we want to put into our own development, you might as well focus it on the things that will matter most in a given context. So we have a number of different frameworks, but really being able to help someone think about the priorities that matter, to look at their own strengths and talents and be able to play to them in a very explicit way, to be aware of their weaker areas, and to not care if a weaker area isn't relevant, I think is a freeing feeling for someone. But if there is something that's mission critical, they need to get better at or focus on and put a little bit more discipline around, that's helpful to be explicit about as well. And then as you say, as our mutual friend Marshall Goldsmith likes to talk about, follow up. Peter Drucker, one of my mentors from the early years, was a big fan of follow up. So the insights are one thing, but then really practicing the right behaviors, getting more feedback, and following up, and making sure you're acting on the insights that come out of a diagnostic, I think is the real hard work that leads to results.
When people finally get the privilege of being able to talk to you and your colleagues, they've been through the batteries that we mentioned a little bit earlier. They've been at this quite some time. They've been through probably every flavor. They might have gotten it as early as college. And certainly if they've been continuing to hit their marks, they've been evaluated along the way, both through the 360 type of feedback that you're talking about, as well as the battery of tests. And I remember one of the occasions when you and I were speaking, you reached back and pulled a volume off the shelf of one of the great tomes of social science. Could you do that for me again and share with me
Let's see here.
Context that happens to be here? Is it
well,
that
look at this,
red guy?
Mark.
Yeah?
It looks like I've just pulled the what is it? Handbook of Industrial and Organizational Psychology off the shelf here. I was struck by, look, there's a little a bookmark here.
Oh, perfect.
An insight on a meta-analysis. What's a meta-analysis for listeners? It's not just one study, but it's an aggregate of lots of studies. So
Right.
a researcher named Guion, Guion, after doing a meta-analysis of many, many studies looking at different selection methods for senior executives, very specifically for CXO folks who are on listening to your show here. He argued, or he doesn't argue, he just flatly says that the evidence is that psychology tests are not predictive or helpful in predicting CEO behavior, C-suite behavior, and are inappropriate for selection decisions, but may be appropriate for development purposes. And I think we share that perspective, both from the research side as well as in practice. But basically it says, hey, look, it's unfortunately any kind of test has bias in it. And so those psychology tests where the assumption is there's some one special profile psychologically that's going to succeed here as a leader, I think is just a flawed assumption. It limits the talent pool. I think there are lots of different folks from lots of different backgrounds who could be successful, lots of different psychology profiles. For example, one of our CEO genome research insights, we've for about a decade have been collecting just empirical, like actual fact-based research on the CEOs who succeed or fail. Thank you very much. So it's not our opinion. We found that so whereas psychology tests actually favor the extroverted, they just do. The right answer to the questions is this is an actual question a CEO friend of mine was asked on a psych test for a selection process. Mark, would you rather be on a Friday evening in a library or at a cocktail party? This is for a sales and marketing oriented brand. So yeah, it's kind of obvious that psych tests favor the extroverted. Yet, if you ask the question, which CEOs actually outperform others, it's the introverts in our data set that have a slight advantage. So, so we're sitting here saying, hey, look, for performance reasons, for low bias reasons, and frankly, just because also, guess what? CEOs don't like sitting down and writing being treated like their pupils, filling out bubble sheets and that kind of thing. We advise against the use of psychology tests. But if you want to game them, they're pretty easy to game for all listeners out there. You want to be extroverted. That's what the right answer is on many psych tests.
Well, I'm wondering if sometimes I haven't gamed myself over the years when I was an executive. I mean, I'm now chief executive of the CEO Academy, which is a wonderfully unique kind of combination of efforts from Wharton, McKinsey, and the largest workforce organizations, Society for Human Resources Management. And they at different points in my career have all had a chance at me in terms of running me through tests that did actually deal with extroversion and introversion. And for some reason, I've migrated from being an introvert to extrovert. I don't know if I just intuitively game the system, or I've changed, or maybe it didn't ever really matter. I'm an omnivert. It might have to do with actually the context and the content of the contribution we're trying to make, which is the thing that I find almost the most offensive about that. It's like we're looking at that behavioral aspect that isn't contextual with what is the applied situation that you're hoping to screen people for.
I think that's right. One of the most successful CEOs I've worked with and advised for a couple decades doesn't talk in management meetings. He's so introverted. He literally, his formula for success is on strategy, do the hard work to really figure out the small number of things that matter most. He puts a lot of energy into hiring and firing and building a very talented team. And then he really does kind of get out of their way. And I'm just struck by the contrast of the conventional wisdom that great CEOs are charismatic and they're doing all the talking and that kind of thing. But this CEO happens to just not choose to talk a whole lot, even during executive leadership team meetings, and really let his team guide the conversation, and it works. So I think I'm with you. Most behaviors are not universally the right ones, but in the right context, the right behavior can produce wonderful results. Sometimes it makes sense to be quiet. Sometimes it makes sense to speak forcefully and loudly and decisively, the way that we kind of envision the stereotypical CEO.
It's interesting. Some of the meta research that I've seen around collaboration has been shocking in that regard, that actually the person who often is interviewed by HR and talks a lot about collaboration sometimes can be, or often in the research, seen as being a person who's not being individually accountable, wherein exactly what you're describing, that collaborative CEO is exactly what we want them to do, but they're not demonstrating that emergent behavior in most contexts, except maybe in the emergency room or in a crisis.
Right.
When you think about the notion of this rubric around looking at the before and after, when you've now evaluated your tools, I'm sure you've migrated them over time to think about what's worked, what's been most predictive. What would you say? I know this is unfair because I'm asking you to oversimplify a very complex equation, but what would be the 3 or 5 characteristics or traits that you find are kind of more predictive in the CEO role,
I'll,
specifically in terms of
I'll
that.
answer your question. I'm of course, horrified by the implication that there's this standard set of
Yes,
strengths.
exactly. Right. That's why I'm
But
apologizing
that
in
that
advance.
that disclaimer aside, and you and I are on the same page as far as the importance of context, we have found some themes that generally are positive trend lines around CEO skills and behaviors. And this is, I think we're up to about 33,000 cases now, Mark, of
Wow.
successful and unsuccessful C-suite executive performances. And here's the punchline on a few of them. So let's see here. I think I have three sets of punchlines. So I'll give you, and this is just different waves of research we've done. We've done them. We've done the analysis ourselves. We've also to reduce bias given these data sets to Steve Kaplan at the University of Chicago. He's a sort of
Yeah.
luminary, and his collaborators at Columbia and other places have crunched this data. So this isn't us finding results that we kind of were hoping to find. This is literally, university level folks, objective folks, spending years and years, finding these insights. So here are the insights. So as far as CEOs and their team performance, so if the question is, hey, what teams succeed at that level of analysis? So if a leader of a team demonstrates these three skills, they are 20 times more likely to accomplish the goals of the team than if they're weak at any one of these three. It's like running a triathlon. You have to be good at biking, running, and swimming. You can't just be good at one or the other. And the three things that we found of it, and there could have been hundreds of things that would have mattered, but these three really mattered. It was the ability to prioritize. So that's one. And the punchline there is the hard work is to narrow the priorities to a small number of things that matter most versus having just too many priorities. The second thing that mattered a lot was who's on the team. So the ability to hire and fire and be very active about really asking the question, do we have the right team? And the third thing that mattered most was the strength of building relationships focused on results. What's that last part? It's kind of the opposite of just the backslapping, good person running around, but really, building relationships where you're constantly focused on results, that characteristic. So you put the three of those things together, you're 20 times more likely to be successful as a leader. That was the stream of research around our power scorebook, because the P from prioritizing, the W from who, and the R for relationships spelled power. It was like a consultant's dream, Mark. We were like, it spells power. And so
acronym.
we were like, thank goodness. And we can measure it too by asking teams to rate themselves on those three areas. Like, hey, 1 to 10, how good are we at prioritizing as a team? 1 to 10, to what extent are we good at putting the right who in the right where? And thirdly, to what extent have we built the right relationships focused on results? If you give the team gives themselves a score 1 to 10 and you multiply them together, it's like 1,000, 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. That's like perfect score, like batting 1,000 in baseball. But we found that teams that score a 729 or better are in the top 10% of performance. So it's just a helpful little way of diagnosing a team's performance on the dimensions that seem to matter most.
For that chief executive particularly, there's no way that anyone does anything valuable alone.
That's right.
That context there also being that as we play well at any sort of endeavor that's really important, the research seems to have indexed towards you can get things done with a team where you might not select those people to go to dinner on Friday night. You might not really like each other that much, but boy, do you ever trust, respect the consistent contribution and the capacity to win with that teammate. You think about a lot of professional sports where that's probably true.
That's right. I think that's right.
That's right. When you think about then the process that many of the listeners and watchers of this program are going through, they've been assessed many times. They've had the psych tests. If they're now blessed to be seriously on that short list. When you think about that first 100 days, that transition, the transom of being on that very, very elite small group of insiders,
Yes.
And I often will be going into the boardroom giving it an evaluation on that trio, while one of my senior pals at one of the big recruiting firms is coming out saying, I just presented the three outsiders. Um, Tell me a little bit about what you feel in terms of the characteristics of longer term success. Often the research shows that there's a disappointment in who we selected, as early as 2 years out, is what the McKinsey research says.
Mhm.
What do you feel like the points of failure are there, in kind of making that transom link? I mean, other than just picking your golf buddy to be the next boss.
Sure. So let's talk about this from the perspective of the board who is selecting the CEO and the perspective of the short list of CEO people. So it'll be
Exactly.
yeah. And so on the first one, the board processes that rely on intuition and gut feel, where if you ask the board now, what process is being used or was used to select the CEO, and if you hear a lot about we know it when we see it, and we're just spending a lot of time with the candidates in an unstructured way, alarm bells should be going off. So that
Yeah.
they're points of system failure that we would look at. One being, was there a set of criteria in advance that was agreed upon by the board? What are we going to rate these candidates on? And boards often, we found, overestimate their perception that the board is on the same page about what we're looking for. I remember there was a fashion brand, a big famous global brand, a fashion company, and we were brought in to help with CEO succession. And the chair was mad at me because I and my two colleagues said, all right, well, let's start the conversation by talking about what the scorecard is, what the set of criteria are for how to select this next CEO. And the chair, she said, look, we don't want to have that conversation because we all know what we're looking for. And I said, well, I appreciate that. And with all due respect, then this will be a very short conversation. So what are we looking for? And one person said, well, we're going to go up market as a brand and charge more money. And someone else said exactly the opposite, that on the left side of the boardroom. They said, hold on a second. I thought our growth strategy hinged on a more approachable, less expensive direction we're going to take in the brand. And then someone else said, digital and e-commerce is really the focus. And someone else said international and these geographies where we previously are underrepresented. So my colleagues and I just sat there and just kind of let the fireworks happen. And then we said, great. So it sounds like we should spend some time on identifying what we really expect this person to accomplish in this role. So step one, the presence of a scorecard is smart and really gets the board focused on the short list of criteria that are going to be used. And then using real data, again, like performance data, not just at that company, but throughout their whole career, to form a point of view on relative to the scorecard, what are the demonstrated strengths or demonstrated weaker areas or unknowns about a person's performance or ability to perform on that scorecard. So scorecard driven analyses of the short list. Hey, here are the 5 candidates. Here's how they score on the set of criteria we agreed on. That kind of thing. That's what, that's like a really great process, because it's focused on a common set of criteria, and it uses data rather than intuitive bias judgment to rank and rate the candidates.
I think that's a lovely way when you saw the sparks fly. Okay, well then tell me what we've all agreed on.
Right. It's funny. It's really, it's hard. It's, with so many board meetings, you kind of get in a groove and you sort of assume everyone's on the same page about, what is the vision for this? I remember there's a several 100-year-old global bank, and we were doing CEO succession, and the chairman didn't want to draw a line in the sand or be too specific about the financial targets or the strategies. And so I prompted this person by saying, these seem to be the strategic areas of focus. And he said, what would make you think that? And I said, well, sir, your previous letter to the shareholders listed those as strategic areas of focus for the business. So we need something here. We got to use something as the the yardstick for measuring candidates. It can't just be vaporware, as you Silicon Valley types might say, or or just like intuition. That's a dangerous non-method for making good selection decisions. And boards, as you mentioned, make mistakes about 50% of the time. If you ask them a year later, are you happy with the CEO pick? There's only about a 50% success rate, which is horrible. That's a very low success rate, largely due to these methodological problems. But if they follow the small list of best practices around having a set of criteria, around collecting a lot of data, and then having discussions that are putting data against a scorecard, they can achieve 90% hiring success, which is much better. Imagine a company that both from the CEO on down is hitting 90% hiring success. You have a company with a lot of the right folks from diverse backgrounds who are talented but good culture matches, doing good work, creating value, versus having 5 out of every 10 hires be regrettable later.
The surprise that I often see on people's faces when I say that the job of the board is to hire and fire the CEO.
Yes.
If you just boil it down to its essence in terms of governance, I guess nothing else works unless that happens. What are you seeing in terms of boards, in terms of how this process is managed? So is it the head of the GovNom? Do you see it the incumbent CEO running the process? How does that get juggled? How does that political juggling unfold these days?
So I don't know if you could see the scar tissue here from making the incumbent outgoing CEO the client, if you will, or
Yes.
having them run the process. It's a horrible decision. It's board laziness when they say, "Oh, okay, work on your own succession, CEO." I remember there's a global healthcare company outgoing CEO whose board told him, "Hey, you need a succession plan, so engage ghSMART, et cetera." And I flew to a faraway place with my colleague, and we sat there. And to our horror, the incumbent CEO said, "My board wants this." And we said, yeah, okay. And he said, "I don't care who my successor is, to be candid." And so I'll do this process. I'll go through the motions. And we said, "No, well, no, thank you. Let's see if we could have a board member sponsor the process for more objectivity." But that was a shame on me. That was about 15 years ago, where we thought, "Oh, okay, let's just." The board wants the CEO to work on their own succession. That makes sense. But for all sorts of reasons, having the CEO drive the process is bad. So yeah, head of Nom and Gov, or lead independent director, or just someone. Board members are smart and very capable. Just one of them should be the project manager, if you will, for the CEO succession process. And the good ones take 3 years. So not 10 years, not 5 years. Not 3 months, not getting going 6 weeks after the predecessor leaves, but about 3 years out from an anticipated succession, the process starts where that board member gets the rest of the board members on the same page about the strategy of the business and what the criteria are for succession. Folks are being evaluated on the existing team. Recruiters are out there doing their market scanning to see who else could we get for this comp package. And that's sort of 3 years out. 2 years out, you have board members reviewing talent in detail, knowing who's in first place, second, third place, what, everyone's fact-based, eyes open on performance. There are outside candidates being considered, as there should be. And just so you know, Mark, we practice what we preach. So in my little popcorn stand of a business, we cleared 100 million in revenue, which we're very proud of. Thank you very much. A couple hundred colleagues around 5 countries. When my president, Randy Street, who's a great colleague, and we wrote the Who book together. He was our managing partner and president for 12 years. And he'd said he'd do the job for 3 or 4. He did it for 12, did a great job, and he's recently been elevated to vice chairman. But it was time to find a new president. So we looked at 157 candidates, Mark. We hired a very expensive search firm. We started the process early. we did the market scans. We had 12 internal candidates in addition to the 157. We ended up,
Really?
we had 6 men and 6 women, as it turned out. 55% of my partners are women at ghSMART, by the way. And so it was a wonderfully thorough process, but that's the scale, I think, of what great looks like if the goal is to really hire an amazing person into the role. In contrast, when boards just sort of like take the list that the search firm gives them, here are the 5, and pick one, and that to me is just incredibly scratching the surface on what should be a very thorough process of looking at lots and lots of candidates. So even we, yeah, and of course, promoting from within is better. You already have more relevant contextual data on the person. There's already a knowledge of if they're a culture match or not and all that, because you don't want organ rejection to happen when you bring someone in from the outside into one of these important roles. But that's the magnitude of what a great search looks like, I believe, for one of these important C-suite spots.
Nothing more inspiring, Geoff, than eating your own cooking
Sure.
and having the discipline, frankly, and the courage and vulnerability to look at that. And I have to believe, and maybe we could close on this thought, that as you do that, I remember Hubert Joly in the early days when he was coming in to do the turnaround at Best Buy. He'd say, I'm Hubert and I need help. And I'm not going to ask you to do anything I wouldn't ask myself and
Yes.
my colleagues to think through. That's what you're doing here. Yeah, getting
We
that.
would feel remiss if we gave your listeners advice, you ought to do this or you should do
Yeah,
that. We
right.
practice ourselves. Yeah. So it's research and theory and practice and mistakes and learning from mistakes and honing over time is how we've arrived at some of these insights we've talked about today.
Well, thank you. And I am so grateful that you're giving the gift of your insights and your discipline to really helping cast the future of capitalism and all organizations to find people who have the character and competence and the alignment with what is needed in an increasingly complex selection process where the stakes are never been higher. So
The stakes are high. The consequences are, in the billions of market cap, the psychology, mental health and well-being of, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees and millions of customers. I mean, we spend so much of our lives at work, Mark.
yeah,
When
yeah.
good hiring happens and great leaders lead with integrity and great values-based approach, it sort of has that ripple effect of elevating the quality of human life, which makes your work and our work so fulfilling.
It is, I know I'm not going to save 10 million lives, but maybe she can, and improve the livelihoods of so many communities. So that feels like it's a noble purpose to be a part of. And thank you for being such a thought leader in the world of the work that you do. So thanks for today.
Pleasure talking with you today, Mark.